The CEO pretended to be an uninsured patient. Only one nurse believed his pain was real. Eric Vale had spent his entire career talking about healthcare access, but on a cold, rainy night in Chicago, he discovered that access began with a woman behind a desk asking for a card he had decided not to carry. He walked into the emergency room of St. Agnes Medical Center wearing an old brown coat, a gray knit cap, and sneakers that were supposed to look worn but still looked suspiciously intentional. He had practiced the name twice in the cab: Evan Miller, uninsured, freelance worker, mild abdominal pain. Simple, at least that had been the plan. The waiting room smelled of disinfectant, wet wool, old coffee, and fear. A toddler coughed against his mother's shoulder. An elderly man sat with one hand pressed to his ribs. A woman in scrubs hurried past with 2 charts under her arm, and the expression of someone who had not sat down since the previous presidential administration. Eric approached the intake desk. Gloria Hayes, 58, glasses low on her nose, looked up at him with the practiced patience of a woman who had already been yelled at by 6 people that evening and expected number 7 soon. Insurance card? Eric swallowed. I don't have one. Something in Gloria's face did not become cruel. It became closed. She slid a clipboard toward him. Name, date of birth, address, emergency contact, employment status, ability to pay. The questions were not rude. That made them worse. They arrived in a calm, bureaucratic line, each one placing a little more distance between him and care. Eric reminded himself this was necessary. Hospitals needed documentation. Systems needed order. Without cost controls, everything collapsed. That was what he said in boardrooms. It sounded colder under fluorescent lights. Gloria tapped the form. Occupation? Eric almost answered automatically. I manage risk exposure. Gloria stared at him. So you sell car insurance or run a sports betting podcast? Eric blinked. Freelance consultant. Her eyebrows rose. Somehow that sounded worse. He took the clipboard and sat down. Around him, patients waited with the dull endurance of people who had learned that pain did not make clocks move faster. Eric had intended to report abdominal discomfort, something vague, common, low urgency. He wanted to test wait time, intake tone, financial screening, escalation protocols, but halfway through writing Evan Miller, a tight pressure ballooned behind his sternum. At first he dismissed it. Stress. Lack of sleep. Too much coffee. Too many late nights ignoring his cardiologist's polite warnings about family history and blood pressure. Then the pressure moved upward. Jaw, left shoulder. His fingers went cold. Eric set the pen down carefully. Control the breathing. Observe. Do not overreact. He had built Helix Care on that principle. Measure before responding. But bodies were poor employees. They did not always wait for approval. A bead of sweat slid down his temple. Gloria noticed him leaning forward. Sir, if you're feeling worse, fill out the top section and we'll update triage. I'm having some chest discomfort. Her eyes narrowed, not unkindly, but with the exhausted skepticism of someone trained to recognize exaggeration from people desperate to move up the list. Chest pain or discomfort? Eric almost laughed. Even pain needed the right category. Pressure, he managed. Some pain in my jaw. Gloria hesitated. Behind her, a phone rang. Someone asked about a billing code. A man across the room groaned. The waiting room seemed to tighten around him. Then a nurse appeared from the trauma hallway, pulling off blue gloves as she walked. Mara Bennett looked younger than Eric expected a person with that much fatigue in her eyes to be. 27, maybe. Dark hair twisted into a messy bun. Badge clipped crookedly. Sneakers scuffed from too many urgent steps. She heard enough. Jaw pain? She asked. Eric nodded. She took his wrist before he answered further, fingers finding his pulse with quick precision. Her expression sharpened. Cold hands. Sweating. Short breaths. She looked at Gloria. EKG now. Gloria lowered her voice. He hasn't verified payment. Mara did not blink. His heart isn't waiting for paperwork to decide whether it's allowed to stop. The words landed harder than Eric expected. For the first time that night, someone looked at him and saw not an uninsured man, not a payment risk, not a form half-filled in suspicious handwriting. A patient. A shift manager appeared near the nurse station just as Mara reached for a wheelchair. Mara, we're already over utilization tonight. Helix Care is reviewing unnecessary cardiac workups this quarter. Eric went still. Helix Care. His company's name sounded different here. Not like a brand. Not like a mission. Like a warning posted between a nurse and a test. Mara's jaw tightened. With all respect, if this is cardiac and I ignore it because an insurer dislikes numbers, we'll have more than utilization to discuss. The manager looked annoyed but stepped aside. Mara pushed Eric toward a small exam bay. The EKG leads were cold against his skin. The machine printed its little strip of jagged truth while rain beat against the windows beyond the curtain. The result was not catastrophic, not yet, but it was abnormal enough that Mara's face lost none of its seriousness. "You're staying for monitoring," she said. Eric wanted to argue. He wanted to ask what criteria she was using, what protocol, what cost threshold, what risk profile. Instead, he watched her grab a thin hospital blanket from a warming cart and unfold it over him. The gesture was efficient, almost rough. Still, it felt warmer than anything that had happened since he walked in. "No insurance doesn't mean no pain," she said. Then she turned to answer another alarm. Eric lay there beneath the blanket, listening to the sounds of the air. Footsteps, wheels, coughing, phones, pain being sorted by urgency and affordability. For years he had defended cost control as clean, rational, necessary, but in the emergency room, under the name Evan Miller, with his own company being used as a reason to hesitate, Eric began to understand something he had never seen on a spreadsheet. A policy could be perfectly worded, and still become a locked door in front of someone who was hurting. Mara Bennett did not comfort people beautifully. That was the first thing Eric noticed. She did not lower her voice into a soft, angelic whisper. She did not float through the ER with endless patience. She moved fast, spoke faster, and carried 3 different emergencies in her head at once. But when she listened completely. Eric lay in the observation bay with EKG stickers still attached to his chest, trying not to look like a man analyzing the operational failures of an emergency department while pretending to be an uninsured freelance consultant named Evan Miller. Mara checked his vitals, glanced at the monitor, adjusted the cuff on his arm, and asked about the pain again. Not once did she look bored. Not once did she treat him like he had exaggerated his way into a bed. Across the curtain, an elderly man asked a billing clerk whether he would be charged for oxygen if he decided he could breathe economically. A young mother bounced a feverish toddler on her hip, while whispering that her insurance had changed, and she did not know what was covered anymore. Near the nurse's station, Dr. Aaron Price stood with one hand pressed to his forehead, arguing into a phone. The patient had been in a car accident. The CT scan was medically reasonable. No, waiting 6 hours was not reasonable. Yes, he understood prior authorization. No. Head trauma did not become less urgent because a form had not completed its journey through the sacred kingdom of fax machines. Eric turned his face toward the curtain. He had heard physicians complain about insurance before, usually in conference panels. Never while a real patient waited 10 feet away. Mara swept back in with a paper cup of water and a packet of crackers she looked at as if she had stolen them from a hostile government. "Eat something unless you're planning to faint for dramatic effect." "I wasn't planning to." "Good. We're overbooked on drama." She moved to leave, but Eric stopped her. "How do you handle the bottleneck process here?" Mara slowly turned. "The what?" "The flow issue. Patient intake, diagnostic approval, bed turnover. Is there a live efficiency board?" Her eyes narrowed. "You sure you're not a consultant who got lost in a sad coat?" Eric looked down at the coat. "It's not that sad. It has resignation energy." Despite the pressure still sitting faintly in his chest, Eric almost laughed. Mara disappeared again before he could respond. He watched her move from room to room, checking an IV, calming a confused man, translating a medication schedule for a worried daughter, reminding a teenager to stop filming himself in the trauma hallway because this is an ER, not your origin story. She was not gentle in the decorative sense. She was reliable. There was a difference. At some point, Eric realized she had not eaten. A paper cup of coffee sat abandoned near the computer station, untouched and certainly cold. Mara took one sip, made a face, and drank it anyway like punishment she had accepted as part of the job. When she came back to check his repeat vitals, Eric asked how she could stand it. Mara did not pretend not to understand. She wrapped the blood pressure cuff around his arm and said the secret was caffeine, good shoes, occasionally cursing the entire American healthcare system internally instead of where patients could hear. The machine beeped. "Blood pressure still high," she said. "I've had a stressful evening. Join the club. We meet never because everyone's working doubles." Before Eric could answer, Mara's phone vibrated in her pocket. She glanced at the screen. The name that flashed was Leo. Her face changed. It was quick, but Eric saw it, the professional mask slipping, revealing something younger and far more frightened underneath. She stepped just outside the curtain to answer, but the ER was too loud and too crowded for privacy. Eric heard fragments, dialysis, dizzy. "Did you eat? Sit down, call Mrs. Patel if it gets worse." "No, don't joke about haunting me, Leo. I'm not in the mood." When she returned, her mouth had settled into a straight line. "Everything okay?" Eric asked. Mara clipped his chart back onto the rail. "That is a rude question in a hospital. Sorry, my brother, chronic kidney disease. He's 17 and dramatic enough to be medically classified as theater." She said it lightly, but the hand holding the chart was tense. Eric's instinct rose before he could stop it. He knew nephrologists, he knew hospital administrators, he knew funding channels, specialists, Medication pathways, private case managers. He could help. The words were almost out. Mara saw them coming. No, I didn't say anything. You got the face. What face? The face men get right before they try to solve my life with resources they should not have brought into conversation. Eric closed his mouth. She pointed the chart at him. You are currently an uninsured freelance consultant in a coat with resignation. Energy. Stay in character. He should have been offended. Instead, he found himself oddly grateful. Then Mrs. Alvarez began screaming. The sound cut through the whole ER. Mara was moving before anyone called her. Eric could see through the gap in the curtain. An older woman doubled over in a chair, one hand clamped to her abdomen, her daughter pleading with Gloria at intake. Mrs. Alvarez had no insurance. She had been waiting for hours. The pain had worsened. The approval for imaging had not cleared because no payment source was verified. Mara knelt in front of her, asked 3 questions, pressed gently on her abdomen, and looked up sharply. Possible appendicitis. She needs imaging now. The shift manager appeared again, already exhausted, already defensive. There was no approval. Radiology had been told to reduce non-reimbursed scans. HelixCare was auditing unnecessary emergency diagnostics across partner hospitals. Agnes could not keep absorbing losses because every abdominal pain became a CT. Mara stood. For the first time, Eric saw her anger fully, not loud. Worse, focused. She said Mrs. Alvarez was not a cost category. She was a woman with rebound tenderness, fever, and worsening pain. If they waited for a payment pathway to become morally convenient, they might be wheeling her into surgery too late. The manager warned that Mara was putting her name on a violation. Mara took the pen from the desk and signed the order herself, Doctor. Aaron Price looked at her, then at Mrs. Alvarez, then signed too. The scan confirmed it, appendicitis, urgent surgery. By the time the transport team came, Mrs. Alvarez's daughter was crying into Mara's shoulder. Mara held her for exactly 3 seconds, then stepped back because 3 other patients still needed her. An hour later, Eric saw the note placed in Mara's file. Deviation from cost control protocol. Pending review. Mara noticed him reading it. Nosy for a man with chest pain. You could lose your job. She shrugged. But the movement was tired, not careless. I'm not brave, she said. I'm just too tired to pretend I don't see people hurting. Then she walked away to answer another call light. Eric remained still beneath the hospital blanket. That sentence stayed with him. He had always thought bad systems harmed patients first. Now he understood something worse. A cruel system did not only delay care for the vulnerable. It slowly trained good people to betray themselves, and then punished them when they refused. By the time Eric was discharged for outpatient follow-up, the rain had not stopped. It had only become meaner. He sat in the hospital lobby with the sad brown coat folded over his lap, looking paler than he wanted to admit. His chest pain had eased, but the night had left something heavier behind. Around him, patients came and went with discharge papers, plastic bags, and the exhausted relief of people who had survived one part of a system only to face the bill later. Mara walked out of the ER 40 minutes after her shift should have ended. Her hair was half falling from its bun. Her scrub pocket bulged with pens, alcohol wipes, and one granola bar that looked old enough to have legal rights. She saw Eric still sitting there and stopped. You waiting for a dramatic rescue? I'm waiting for a taxi. In this rain, that appears to be the flaw in the plan. She studied him. Then she sighed with the weariness of a woman who knew she was about to be kind and resented the inconvenience. I can drop you near the train. Eric hesitated. He had ridden in private cars, corporate SUVs, executive shuttles, and once a helicopter that had made him reconsider arrogance. Mara's car was different. The passenger seat was buried beneath a winter coat, a lunch container, 2 medical textbooks, a pair of compression socks still in packaging, and a reusable water bottle covered in stickers that said things like nurses call the shots and hydrate or dihydrate. Eric stood beside the open door, unsure where to place his body. Mara moved an anatomy flashcard deck and shoved the coat into the back seat. Nurse car, she said. It's an emergency room with wheels, worse coffee, and more unpaid parking tickets. He climbed in carefully. A book slid onto his foot. Is this renal pharmacology light reading? For whom? A haunted nephrologist. Mara looked at him, surprised. Then she laughed. It was short, rough, and real enough to make Eric want to earn another one. They drove through Chicago under streetlights blurred by rain. Without the noise of the ER, Mara seemed both younger and more tired. She kept one hand on the wheel. The other loosely around a coffee cup she had clearly forgotten was empty. Eric told her carefully that he worked in healthcare management. It was not a lie. It was also not the truth in any form that mattered. He said he used to believe systems had to be cold to be fair. If rules bent too much, abuse entered. If costs were not controlled, everyone paid more. If every exception became policy, the structure collapsed. Mara kept her eyes on the road. Cold systems usually make poor people cold first. The sentence landed between them. No anger, no speech, just experience. She told him a little about Leo then, 17, chronic kidney disease. Too smart for his own good. Too fond of jokes involving his possible ghost. Mara had once planned to become a nurse practitioner. Maybe work in community care, maybe have a schedule that allowed her to sleep like a human being. Then Leo's illness worsened. Their mother died. Bills grew teeth. School became something she placed on a shelf and promised she would return to someday. Eric wanted to help before she finished speaking. He imagined tuition, specialists, medication access, a discreet fund, one call to the right person. He said none of it. That silence felt like lifting a weight with muscles he had never used. Mara's phone rang when they were 6 blocks from the train. Leo. She answered on speaker only after warning Eric that if her brother said anything embarrassing, he was legally required to forget it. Leo's voice was thin but bright. He felt dizzy. He had eaten, technically, no. Chips counted emotionally, not medically. Mara's face tightened. She changed direction. Eric did not ask. He simply held the empty coffee cup when she handed it to him, and braced as she took a turn fast enough to suggest nurses ignored traffic laws when family was involved. Leo lived with Mara in a narrow apartment above a closed thrift store. The place was clean but crowded. Pill organizers on the counter, dialysis appointment reminders on the fridge, textbooks stacked beside comic books. Leo was on the couch under a blanket, pale but alert enough to inspect Eric. "So this is the sad coat guy?" Mara groaned. Eric looked down at himself. "The coat has received a lot of feedback tonight." Leo nodded. "You also sound like an insurance call center trying to become a person." For the second time that night, Eric laughed before he could stop himself. He sat awkwardly on the edge of a chair while Mara checked Leo's blood pressure with a tenderness she seemed embarrassed to show. Leo talked about a video game, about a villain with terrible kidneys, about how Mara spoke more sweetly to the blood pressure cuff than she did to men who might want to date her. Mara threatened to throw a sock at him. Eric listened. He did not know what to say to a 17-year-old who joked around a disease that had already stolen too much from him. So he stopped trying to be impressive and simply asked questions about the game. Leo brightened. Mara saw it, and against her better judgment, something in her softened. The next morning, Eric returned to Helix Care. He did not go to his office first. He went to data. Vanessa Crane appeared within 20 minutes, sharp suit, sharper expression. St. Agnes, she reported, had increased diagnostic utilization among low-coverage and uninsured patients. The hospital was drifting outside cost benchmarks. If Helix Care did not tighten review standards, other partner hospitals would follow. Eric listened to words he had heard 1,000 times. Utilization, benchmarks, risk profiles, abuse prevention, after Mara's car, after Leo's couch, after Mrs. Alvarez nearly waded her way into a ruptured appendix. The language sounded sanitized enough to be dangerous. He requested denied authorization files. Vanessa objected, then complied. By evening, Eric had read enough to feel ill. Cases flagged as low ability to pay. Requests delayed because an algorithm predicted possible overuse. Imaging denied until symptoms escalated. Medication marked not immediately necessary by a model that had never sat beside a 17-year-old trying to make his sister laugh through. Dizziness. Then Leo's denial appeared. A supportive medication his nephrologist had requested had been rejected by Helix Care as not medically necessary at this time. Eric stared at the screen. He could approve it with one call. He could fix Leo's case quietly before Mara ever knew. That was the temptation. Clean, fast, personal. Wrong. That night he returned to Mara's apartment because she had texted him only one word: denied. Mara did not cry when she showed him the notice. That was worse. She stood in the kitchen, one hand on the counter, the other holding the paper as if it weighed more than paper should. The scariest part, she said, is not being told no. It's wondering if anyone actually read his name before they said it. Eric looked at the Helix Care logo on the denial letter. His logo, his system, his signature, spread across thousands of choices he had never had to watch. The lie could not survive that kitchen. He left in the rain with the truth pressing against his ribs, harder than the chest pain had. He had not only disguised himself as an uninsured patient, he had disguised himself as a decent man while the company he led made people like Mara, exhausted from begging machines, to believe that pain was real. Mara Bennett came to Helix Care because she thought someone was finally ready to listen. That was what Eric had said. A policy review, frontline testimony, a chance to tell the people above the system what happened below it. So she came after a 12-hour shift, still in scrubs, hair pinned badly, eyes burning from no sleep and too much vending machine coffee. She brought notes about Mrs. Alvarez, about delayed imaging, about Leo's denied medication. about the way nurses were asked to hold human suffering in one hand and cost control rules in the other. She expected a conference room full of executives. She did not expect to see Evan Miller standing at the head of the table in a tailored charcoal suit, except nobody called him Evan. Vanessa Crane, sharp and elegant at his right side, glanced at him and said, "Mr. Vale, legal is ready." Mara stopped walking. For one strange second, her mind refused to put the pieces together. Then it did. Eric Vale, CEO of Helix Care. The uninsured patient with the sad coat. The man she had pushed past payment protocol for. The man who had sat in her car among compression socks and cold coffee. The man who had met Leo, heard about the denial, listened while she admitted the terror of not knowing whether anyone had read her brother's name. He had not been powerless. He had been hiding power. Eric's face changed when he saw the moment land. He stepped toward her, but Mara moved back as if his apology had physical weight. He tried to explain. At first he had gone undercover to understand the complaints. Then he had not known how to tell her. Then the evidence became bigger than one night, one patient, one nurse, one denied medication. Mara stared at him. The explanation sounded exactly like the kind of language she hated most. Polished, reasonable, and late. She told him he had turned her ER, her patients, and her brother into a secret audit. She had cared for him because she believed he was another person being crushed by the system. Meanwhile, he was the man whose signature lived inside that system. Eric did not defend himself. That was the first decent thing he did in the room. The meeting began with Mara still standing near the door, arms folded, jaw tight. Eric presented the findings without decoration. At St. Agnes and dozens of partner hospitals, Helix Care policy had created pressure to delay diagnostics for uninsured and underinsured patients. Internal models flagged certain cases as high-cost risk before medical review. Emergency approvals were routed through systems designed for efficiency, not urgency. Nurses and doctors were being forced to choose between clinical instinct and financial penalty. Dr. Aaron Price had sent written testimony. So had 3 other physicians. Gloria Hayes had submitted intake notes showing how payment questions were pushed earlier and earlier into the care process. Vanessa did not deny every point. That made her more dangerous. She argued with the calm of someone who had spent years making hard things sound responsible. If Helix Care opened approvals too broadly, premiums would rise. If hospitals ordered unlimited scans, abuse would increase. If every emotional case bent policy, the company could lose financial stability and millions of members would suffer. She looked at Mara, not unkindly. A system could not run on compassion alone. Mara almost laughed, not because Vanessa was wrong about money, because people with money always acted as if compassion was the reckless part. Then Vanessa turned to Eric. He had to choose, she said. A few heartbreaking stories, or the stability of the whole system. The room went quiet. Eric looked at Mara. She hated that some part of her still wanted him to be the man from the car. The one who had listened to Leo explain video game villains. The one who had laughed when her brother called him an insurance call center trying to become human. Then someone asked if Mara wanted to speak. She nearly refused. She would not become the nurse in Eric Vale's redemption story. She would not stand there so Helix Care could later say it had listened to real voices while returning to the same cruelty with softer branding. But Mrs. Alvarez had almost waded herself into surgery too late. Leo's denial letter was still folded in Mara's bag, so she spoke. She said patients were not financial loopholes. Nurses were not security guards hired to stand between poor people and treatment. Doctors should not have to argue with phone trees while patients bled, seized, waited, worsened. Her voice shook only once. A system that required caregivers to pretend pain was invisible had become sick before the patients ever walked in. No one interrupted her. When she finished, Eric stood. He did not thank her in that corporate way that made gratitude sound like a transaction. He did not call her brave. He did not make her pain beautiful for the room. He said Helix Care had failed, not abstractly, under his leadership. He announced an independent audit of denial and delay patterns, immediate suspension of the cost-risk algorithm in emergency cases, a physician-led urgent approval pathway, retroactive review of denied critical medications, and a community hospital support fund governed outside Helix Care's marketing department. Vanessa went pale. Legal whispered. The board members looked like they were watching money leave the building through every vent. Mara felt no triumph. After the meeting, Eric followed her into the hallway. He said Leo's medication would be reviewed immediately. Mara turned on him. Leo would submit through the new process like everyone else. If the drug was approved, it would be because a doctor read his file. Not because the CEO felt guilty about lying to his sister. Eric absorbed that. Slowly, painfully, he understood. Loving someone did not give him the right to make a private exception out of their suffering. Mara left without looking back. By morning, the story had leaked. Insurance CEO pretended to be uninsured patient and fell for nurse, who treated him. Reporters swarmed St. Agnes. Online strangers called Mara a hero, a fool, an opportunist, a saint. Helix Care's PR team drafted a campaign about the nurse who reminded us care comes first. Eric killed it immediately. No photo, no interview, no Mara Bennett story. But the damage had already found her. A reporter cornered Mara outside the ambulance bay and asked whether she had known who Eric was when she treated him. She looked past the camera, furious and exhausted. The scandal had entered her life because of his lie, and even if Eric was finally changing the system, Mara did not yet know whether she could forgive the man who had made her private compassion public property. A few months later, Helix Care still had lawyers. That was how Mara knew the company had not become holy overnight. There were still meetings, arguments, angry investors, and executives who looked at compassion as if it had arrived without a budget code. But something had changed in ways people at St. Agnes could feel before anyone printed a press release. Emergency approvals now went through independent physicians, not only cost review software. Community hospitals received support for treating uninsured patients without being punished for every scan, every test, every human instinct that said, "Look closer before it's too late." The cost-risk algorithm had been suspended in emergency settings and placed under external audit. Patients could finally see why a service was denied, not a vague phrase, not a cold paragraph, a reason, a name, a path to appeal. It was not enough to fix everything, but it was enough to prove the old way had not been inevitable. Leo's medication was approved through the new review process. Mara read the letter 3 times, looking for the hidden exception, the private favor. The place where Eric Vale had slipped his guilt into her brother's file, there was none. A physician panel had reviewed Leo's history, his nephrologist's notes, ANSLB trends, and the risks of waiting. The approval was clean, documented, replicable. For the first time in months, Mara cried without hating herself for it. Leo found her in the kitchen, holding the paper against her chest. Are these happy tears, or I'm about to reorganize the entire healthcare system with a stapler tears? Mara wiped her face. Both. Good. Very on brand. Leo improved slowly, not magically. Chronic illness did not exit a story because someone wrote a better policy. But the medication helped. His dizziness eased. His jokes became more annoying, which Mara considered a clinical sign of progress. She stayed at St. Agnes, still exhausted, still sharp-tongued, still drinking coffee that tasted like burnt legal documents. But she also enrolled in a part-time nurse practitioner program after the hospital launched a scholarship for frontline nurses. Not Mara's scholarship, a real one, open to nurses across partner hospitals. She applied under her own name and won under her own merit. That mattered more than any gift would have. Eric changed too, not in the dramatic way headlines preferred. He stepped back from direct control over several medical policy divisions and accepted an independent clinical oversight board with the power to challenge Helix Care decisions. Vanessa Crane stayed, though not unchanged. She still cared about cost. She still warned that compassion without structure could collapse under its own weight. But she stopped speaking as if numbers were the only reality. One day in a meeting, Vanessa said almost quietly that financial stability was not the same thing as moral health. Eric did not smile. He simply wrote it down. The next time Mara saw him, he was sitting in the last row of a patient rights training session at St. Agnes. No cameras. No PR team, no tailored suit sharp enough to cut apology into something marketable. Just Eric in a dark sweater and plain coat, listening while Mara spoke to a room of nurses, administrators, and caseworkers about believing patients before doubting them. She saw him halfway through and nearly lost her sentence. Then she kept going, because the training was not for him. That was another thing he had finally learned. Afterward, Mara found him near the vending machine, staring at the hospital coffee options like a man considering a medical risk. He chose one, took a sip, regretted several life decisions. Mara leaned against the wall beside him. If you can survive emergency room coffee, you might be ready to become a normal person. Eric looked at the cup. This tastes like a printer jam. That's the Colombian roast. He laughed softly. The sound was different from the first night. Less controlled, less surprised by itself. For a moment, neither of them said the thing standing between them. The lie, the ear, Leo's denial, the reporters. The way trust had cracked before it had even learned how to stand. Eric spoke first. He did not ask for forgiveness. Mara respected that. He said he was trying to stop loving people by making exceptions for them. He did not want to fix private pain while leaving everyone else trapped in the same machine. He wanted to learn how to stand beside someone without turning them into proof that he was good. Mara looked at him for a long time. She told him she was still angry. Eric nodded. She told him she had noticed he changed things without requiring her to stand beside him at a podium. He nodded again, but this one looked harder. Then he asked if, someday, she might want coffee with him that did not come from a hospital vending machine. Mara lifted an eyebrow. If you call it a relationship evaluation meeting, I'm reporting you to security. I was going to call it a date. She tried not to smile, failed. Then someday, she said. Yes. A week later, Eric returned to St. Egg without a disguise. No sad coat. No false name. No secret audit hiding inside his pockets. He sat in the waiting room with everyone else while Mara finished her shift. Beside him, a man in worn work boots clutched his stomach and stared at the intake desk. His paperwork sat unfinished in his lap. I don't have insurance, the man whispered, mostly to himself. They're going to think I'm wasting time. Eric did not hand him a business card. He did not call the CEO line. He did not make the man a special exception. He walked to the nurse's station and found the triage nurse. He says his pain is real, Eric said quietly. Please believe him. From the end of the hallway, Mara saw. She did not smile right away. But her eyes softened, and that was enough. Their love had not begun because Eric pretended to be a patient. It began because Mara believed his pain was real, and it grew when Eric finally understood that every pain deserved to be believed before anyone decided what it was worth.